Welcome back, everybody. I think today's deep dive is going to be particularly fascinating. We're exploring a single source, a message about God's mission. But you know it. This isn't just going to be like a rehash of, the usual mission trip spiel or whatever. The source really flips the script. It's looking at God, the Bible, even us believers, through this kind of like missionary lens.
Yeah, and what I think is so intriguing about this source is how it really breaks this whole concept of God's mission down into these like 5 core elements: love, sending, mercy, glory, and like personal responsibility.
Well, okay, I'm hooked already. So how does this source actually like reframe our understanding of, well, everything?
It starts by like boldly proclaiming that God is a missionary God, and then it takes it even further. It suggests that like Jesus is the first missionary. The Bible is a missionary book. The church is a missionary institution. And like we, the believers, are God's missionaries. So it's like suddenly the whole world becomes our mission field. It's a pretty like radical shift in perspective, don't you think?
It really is. It really is. But it also kind of raises a question for me. If we're all like missionaries now, where does this idea of love fit into this? It's not just about like handing out pamphlets on the street corner, right?
Right. You're totally right. And the source actually dives pretty deep into how God's love is really like the driving force behind his mission. There's this one quote that I think really captures it. It says, "Mission is the external expression of the internal love of God in us."
Oh, that's beautiful. It's like that love inside us has to like spill out into the world somehow. But how do we actually do that?
Well, the source uses this really powerful anecdote about the author's experience at a winter Bible camp. And apparently just like hearing about God's love in that setting really had this like profound impact on him. And it really inspired this like lifelong commitment to serving God. And I think it highlights how experiencing that love can be like truly transformative.
Yeah, it makes me think about like the times in my own life when I felt that like deep connection to God's love. It's almost like you can't help but want to share it with other people. Yeah.
Exactly. It's not about like duty or obligation. It just flows naturally from that place of love. And that leads us perfectly into the next core element.
And this is where it gets really interesting to me, because God sending his son into the world, this is like this huge cosmic event, but how does that connect to us, us ordinary folks being sent?
Well, the source draws this like really brilliant parallel. It's like God sending Jesus was like the starting line.
Yeah.
And now we're all like a part of this divine relay race, carrying this message
Oh,
forward.
I love that. I love that analogy. So how does this idea of sending fit in with, those biggies, the Great Commission and the Great Commandment? Are those like separate things or?
Well, that's where it gets really theologically fascinating.
Yeah.
Because the source argues that they're actually like deeply interconnected. So the Great Commission, telling us to spread the gospel, and the Great Commandment urging us to love God and love our neighbor, they kind of like work together.
So it's not just about like preaching the word, it's about how we like embody that love in our actions, our relationships, how we treat other people.
Exactly. You can't really truly fulfill one without the other. And I think that's where the missionary lens becomes really powerful, because it's not just about, far off lands or converting people. It's about how we live every single day.
That makes a lot of sense. But is it a one-time decision? Like, okay, I'm a missionary now.
Yeah.
Done. Or is there more to it?
Right. Well, that's another crucial point that the source emphasizes. It's the ongoing nature of our commitment. It challenges us to like reconfess and re-respond to God's mission constantly. It's like a lifelong journey, not a destination.
So it's not about checking a box. It's about this like constant state of being, of living out that love and that sending. Man, this is giving me a lot to think about already. I'm also curious about the source's take on mercy and grace. How do those fit into this whole mission framework?
Well, that's where we see that like the beauty of God's character really shining through. The source defines mercy as what God removes that we deserve. And grace is what he gives us that we don't deserve.
So it's not just about following rules or earning our way to heaven or whatever. It's about like recognizing that we're constantly in need of God's forgiveness and love.
Exactly. And that's what makes these concepts so essential to God's mission. They demonstrate his incredible compassion for humanity.
And this is where those powerful quotes from the source really hit home for me. "My grace is sufficient for you, and mercy and grace shall follow me all the days of my missional life."
Yeah. Those quotes really encapsulate the idea that we're just like enveloped by God's mercy and grace every single day.
Yeah.
Even when we stumble or make mistakes.
It's funny. Sometimes I think we can get so caught up in like the doing part of faith, the checklists and the tasks, that we forget about the sheer magnitude of God's grace. It's like this constant undercurrent carrying us along.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And it raises an important question for you, dear listener. How have you experienced that mercy and grace in your own life? Take a moment to reflect on those moments where you felt God's presence, even when you felt unworthy.
Oh man, those moments are so powerful, aren't they? They remind us that God's mission isn't just this abstract concept, It's something we can experience and participate in every single day.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And when we experience that mercy and grace ourselves, it empowers us to extend it to others. It's like a ripple effect, spreading outwards.
Okay, so we've talked about love, sending, mercy, and grace. That brings us to the final element, glory. This one's a bit more complex, right? How does the source connect God's mission to his glory?
Right. It's a really interesting perspective. The source suggests that God's mission ultimately serves his glory, but not in a way that diminishes our role. It's not about God, needing us to accomplish his goals.
So it's not like God's sitting up in heaven being like, well, I need those humans to do this for me or I won't be glorious. Right.
Not at all. Instead, it's about recognizing that God is the source of all accomplishments, and our participation in his mission allows us to kind of reflect his glory.
Oh, so it's less about us achieving something for God and more about us being channels for his glory to shine through. I like that image.
Yeah. And the source actually uses a quote from Philippians 2.13 to illustrate this. Mission is God's doing, therefore all credits and honor belong to him. It's a powerful reminder that we're not striving for our own recognition or success.
It's about surrendering our egos and allowing God to work through us, and that humility allows his glory to be even more radiant. But this also kind of brings up another question for me. If it's all about God's glory, doesn't that make our efforts feel kind of insignificant?
Right.
What's the point if it's not about what we achieve?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's one that a lot of people wrestle with. But here's where things get really interesting. The source also really emphasizes personal responsibility as a key element of God's mission. And it's not about feeling insignificant. It's about understanding the incredible privilege we have to be a part of something much bigger than ourselves.
So it's not a burden, it's an honor.
Exactly. The source makes a really clear distinction between viewing mission as a duty rather than a voluntary act or a mere service. It's not something we do out of obligation. It's an integral part of who we are as believers.
It's we're hardwired for it. So it's not a suggestion, it's a calling. We are obligated to participate in God's mission. But what does that actually look like in practice? What's the source's specific call to action for us?
Well, the source urges us to completely rethink our lives in terms of God's mission. It's not just about carving out time for church or charity work. It's about living out the gospel in every aspect of our lives, our relationships, our careers, our hobbies, everything.
Wow. That's challenging. It's about integrating faith into every facet of our existence. But I think for a lot of people, that can feel really overwhelming. Where do you even begin to apply that missionary lens to your entire life?
Right. Well, that's where the source provides a really helpful example. The Apostle Paul. It points to Rom.1 where Paul outlines his own philosophy and approach to mission. And his approach is incredibly inspiring and practical.
Okay, I'm all ears. Let's break down Paul's approach and see what key takeaways we can glean for ourselves.
Okay. The first thing that really stands out is Paul's sense of indebtedness to God for the gospel and a responsibility towards all people.
Yeah.
He didn't see spreading the good news as an option. It was an imperative.
Mm-hmm. That echoes the source's earlier point about love being the driving force behind mission. Because when you truly grasp the magnitude of God's love and sacrifice, it compels you to share it with others.
Absolutely. And then there's Paul's incredible eagerness and passion. He wasn't hesitant or ashamed. He was fired up about sharing the gospel.
Yeah, he wasn't just going through the motions. You can practically feel his energy leaping off the page. That kind of contagious enthusiasm is definitely inspiring. But let's be real. Not everyone's a charismatic preacher like Paul. How can the average person cultivate that kind of passion?
Well, I think it comes down to recognizing the transformative power of the gospel. When you truly believe that this message has the power to change lives, it's hard not to be passionate about sharing it.
Yeah, it's like you're offering someone a life raft when they're drowning, You can't help but be urgent about it. But passion alone isn't always enough, is it? There are going to be challenges, roadblocks, people who just flat out reject the message. How did Paul deal with that?
Right. Well, that's where Paul's courage and boldness come in. He didn't shy away from adversity. He faced it head on with unwavering faith. He was imprisoned, beaten, shipwrecked. But he never gave up on his mission.
Wow. He's like a true role model for persevering in the face of obstacles. It's like he understood that rejection and hardship were just part of the journey.
Exactly. And finally, the source emphasizes Paul's unwavering commitment to God's mission. It wasn't just a side project for him. It was his life's purpose. He poured his heart and soul into it.
So in essence, Paul embodies all the key elements of God's mission that we've been discussing. Love, sending, mercy, grace, and seeking God's glory. He truly lived out what it meant to be a missionary.
And that's a powerful reminder for all of us.
Yeah.
We don't have to be theologians or preachers to participate in God's mission. We can follow Paul's example by embracing those same core principles in our everyday lives.
Man, this deep dive has really challenged me to think differently about what it means to live out my faith. It's not just about going to church or reading my Bible. It's about seeing the world through this missionary lens, looking for opportunities to share God's love and grace in everything I do.
And I think that's the beauty of this source. It doesn't just give us like a list of rules or instructions. It invites us to embark on this like lifelong journey of transformation.
So as we're wrapping things up here, what's like the one key takeaway you hope our listeners walk away with from this deep dive?
Well, I hope they'll embrace the multifaceted nature of God's mission. It's not just about evangelizing or performing good deeds. It's about embodying God's love, mercy, and grace in every aspect of our lives. It's about seeing the world as our mission field and recognizing that we all have a role to play in advancing God's kingdom.
Beautifully said. And to kind of echo that sentiment, I want to leave our listeners with a thought-provoking question inspired by the source. How can you, as an individual, embody the principles of God's mission? Love, sending, mercy, grace, and seeking his glory in your daily life.
Yeah. It's a question worth pondering, dear listener, because God's mission isn't some distant concept. It's a living, breathing reality that's woven into the fabric of our existence.
And as we navigate the complexities of life, may we always remember that we are part of something bigger than ourselves. We are God's missionaries, called to share his love and light with the world.
So, go out there and be the embodiment of God's mission. Let your life be a testament to his goodness and grace.
Until next time, keep diving deep. And keep seeking truth.
Yeah, that's where Paul's courage and boldness come in. He didn't shy away from adversity. He faced it head on with unwavering faith. He was imprisoned, beaten, shipwrecked, but he never gave up on his mission.
He's a true role model for persevering in the face of obstacles. It's like he understood that rejection and hardship were just part of the journey.
Exactly. And finally, the source emphasizes Paul's unwavering commitment to God's mission. It wasn't just a side project for him. It was his life's purpose. He poured his heart and soul into it.
So in essence, Paul embodies all the key elements of God's mission that we've been discussing. Love, sending, mercy, grace, and seeking God's glory. He truly lived out what it meant to be a missionary.
And that's a powerful reminder for all of us. We don't have to be theologians or preachers to participate in God's mission. We can follow Paul's example by embracing those same core principles in our everyday lives.
Man, this deep dive has really challenged me to think differently about what it means to live out my faith, It's not just about going to church or reading my Bible. It's about seeing the world through this missionary lens, looking for opportunities to share God's love and grace in everything I do.
And I think that's the beauty of this source. It doesn't just give us like a list of rules or instructions. It invites us to embark on this like lifelong journey of transformation.
So as we're wrapping things up here, what's like the one key takeaway you hope our listeners walk away with from this deep dive?
Well, I hope they'll embrace the multifaceted nature of God's mission. It's not just about evangelizing or performing good deeds. It's about embodying God's love, mercy, and grace in every aspect of our lives. It's about seeing the world as our mission field and recognizing that we all have a role to play in advancing God's kingdom.
Beautifully said. And to kind of echo that sentiment, I want to leave our listeners with a thought-provoking question inspired by the source. How can you, as an individual, embody the principles of God's mission, love, sending, mercy, grace, and seeking his glory in your daily life?
Yeah, it's a question worth pondering, dear listener, because God's mission isn't some distant concept. It's a living, breathing reality that's woven into the fabric of our existence.
And as we navigate the complexities of life, may we always remember that we are part of something bigger than ourselves. We are God's missionaries, called to share his love and light with the world.
So go out there and be the embodiment of God's mission. Let your life be a testament to his goodness and grace.
Until next time, keep diving deep and keep seeking truth.
Yeah, and another thing about Paul that's so inspiring is how he never lost sight of the bigger picture, even in the midst of all these like crazy challenges and setbacks. He always remembered that his ultimate goal was to bring glory to God.
It's like he understood that it wasn't about him, it was about something much greater.
Right. And that's a really important lesson for us today. Because it's so easy to get caught up in our own little worlds, our own successes and failures. But when we view our lives through the lens of God's mission, it helps us to stay focused on what really matters.
Yeah, it's like a shift in perspective.
Yeah.
From me to God.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to circle back to something we talked about earlier. The idea of personal responsibility. We've established that we're all called to participate in God's mission. But what does that actually look like on a practical level?
Well, I think it starts with being intentional about our choices. Every day we're faced with countless opportunities to either reflect God's love or to ignore it. And it's in those small moments, those seemingly insignificant interactions, that we can really make a difference.
It's about being mindful of how our words and actions can impact others, and about looking for ways to be a light in the darkness.
Exactly. And, it doesn't have to be anything grand or dramatic. Sometimes the most powerful acts of mission are the simplest ones.
Like a kind word, a helping hand, or just a listening ear.
Yeah. It's about being present, being available, and being willing to share God's love in whatever way we can.
This deep dive has been so insightful, and I think it's a great reminder that God's mission isn't something that's out there in the distance. It's right here, right now, in our everyday lives.
Yeah, it's an invitation to join God in his work of transforming the world.
So to our listeners, we encourage you to go out there and be the embodiment of God's love. Let your lives be a testament to his grace and mercy. And remember, you're not alone in this journey. We're all in this together.
Yeah. And until next time, keep seeking truth.
Yeah.
And keep diving deep.
And keep shining your light.